Hello, and welcome to the Visible Women Podcast. I'm Corinne Corbett, and along with co-host Kim DeBrew, we put issues related to diversity, inclusion, and appearance in the spotlight and examine how they impact the lives of women of color. It's the first Visible Women Podcast show of 2019, and we're excited to be here today. And what we want to talk about is how we choose to be visible this year. We don't want to talk about resolutions. We don't want to talk about what happened last year. We want to talk about how each of us, you too, can be more visible in our lives this year, starting now. So what comes to mind for you, Kim?
I think it's a great question. I have been watching my feed in LinkedIn be filled with New Year's resolutions, with things about health and fitness, 5 tips for starting the year off right in terms of your business or whatever projects you're prioritizing. When I thought about this initial conversation for 2019, I was just reflecting on what I'm asking many of my clients to do, which is to start doing some visioning and to think about themselves a year from now and think about the story they want to tell about how the year went, about how they matched up against their goals. It's kind of for lack of a better word, it's a kind of way to get organized about how you want to show up in different ways in your life. And when I did that for myself, I think I was sharing with you in our pre-conversation, my answers were very small. They were limited to maybe a set of tasks, some things related to my business and getting my administrative life in order, or making sure that I was organized around home life things. Some had to do with sort of aspirational things, ways I want to impact on the lives of my clients, whether my coaching or consulting clients. What I was realizing was the list I was coming up with was just way too small. And I noticed it and I thought, there's something kind of unsatisfying about this, even though it's a forecast about a year from now. And what I realized was my starting question was way too small. I asked myself instead, what is your heart's desire for 2019? A much bigger question. What's the contribution that you want to make to the world? And so I think my first answer to our question about how I'm going to try to be visible in 2019 is that I want to the extent possible, tap into as many ways as I can of advancing my heart's desire. So certainly that will come through the work that I do professionally. It'll come through the conversations we have with our listeners, with each other via the podcast. But there are other big ways that up until now are unexplored. They're not on my visioning list. So I started thinking about, what's the most far-fetched thing I could possibly do? Who would I need to talk to get that started? What's the crazy idea that I'm even scared to say out loud or to talk to somebody else about? What would I do to get that started? For me, that launched me in a whole nother direction. I think that's my January work, is to really start thinking about what I'm here to do. It's that why you're here question, which is so fundamental. And I hearken back to our conversation about the Michelle Obama memoir on becoming. And I mean, it's still landing with me in a real substantive way. There is not an end. It's not a single end that I've achieved. I can keep revisiting that. I can keep circling back to my why in the world. So I think that's where I'm starting out 2019, and we'll see where it takes me.
I would argue
And when you said, what's the craziest thing you could do in 2019 that you never thought of? In 2018, we started this podcast. And I know at the beginning of 2018, we were not thinking about a podcast. We weren't thinking about being transparent about our experiences. Some of the experiences that we've had in work, in our personal lives. I think that's radical in and of itself. And so we have to give ourselves like credit for having done that. But yeah, to your point, yeah, we can be bigger and bolder based upon that first step. For me, I love this idea of thinking beyond task oriented. For me, after 2016 and 17 were grad school for the most part for me. So 2018, last year, was a lot of repositioning. And what I, 2019, in terms of heart's desires, are really to remember my gifts too. Sometimes when you're focused, as I often am, on just survival, you forget the things that bring you joy, like writing for fun, as opposed to writing for work or any kind of artistic things, going to the museum, those kinds of things that you delight in that you don't remember that you delight in are important parts of, just creating a fulfilling life and a life of joy. But for me, when I think about how I want to move forward this year, I thought about The War of Art, one of Stephen Pressfield's books. And he talks about the difference between being an amateur and a professional and how you approach your work. And an amateur takes things personally, takes everything personally. Maybe somebody didn't call you back. Maybe you got feedback at work from a supervisor, or if you're an entrepreneur, from a client that you took to heart. And oftentimes when that happens, you're stalled, you stumble, and it keeps you off your path. What I remember him saying about being a professional is a professional receives that information, but is not stalled by that information. So you're able to take in information and continue forward. So that is important to me to remember and to activate whenever possible this year for me. The other thing is that when we first started talking about the show, I used the term greater expectations for myself. But in that greater expectations, it's not necessarily checking off all the goals, but expect more out of life and enjoy my life that way. But sometimes you make plans, and if you're too rigid about the goal, you miss the joy in between. And you don't understand how a finish line can continue to move. So if you have greater expectations of yourself, you're able to take that into account, take account that moving goal line, adjust, but not penalize yourself if you don't get to a point that you expect to get to. You're still okay with it. I think that's really important to me.
Oh my gosh, you said so many good things. I'm just trying to remember and kind of play back. So you talked about the importance of
the amateur versus professional.
Oh yeah, so you talked about the amateur versus professional distinction, and I had it when I heard you mention it. I had sort of an immediate emotional response, right? So when you get feedback or lack of feedback, the ways to kind of internalize and make things personal, right? Or to have a target and have some expectations of yourself and have them not realized maybe, or have them not being realized in the time frame you envisioned. All of those things, as you were talking about it, was kind of like felt like it was like walking up my street, just kind of like poking me, because I mean, I don't know about you, but it is very difficult to kind of take in, absorb, and keep moving with it, right? And not be weighted down with your realization that, wow, something you intended may not have worked out as you intended, right?
Exactly.
Great when you have unexpected joys like this podcast, right? We didn't set out to do this at the outset of 2018. But how about when those things are actually setbacks, right? I continue to struggle with what I think our guest, Loretta Brady, talked about as kind of that ability to bounce back. The height of our bounce, I think, is the term she used.
Yeah.
And, what are the things, I don't know if you have, I want to call them handy dandy tips, but some things that you've learned about being able to absorb and have it not weigh you down, absorb whatever, are kind of those, for lack of a better word, setbacks or harsh realities or reality checks.
One of the things that I think having a media background has taught me is you can be a superstar at one place and a dud someplace else with the same personality and skill set. So a lot of opinions are subjective. And one of the things that when you're seeking clients and organizations as a firm to work with or a job, you want to find people that get you. If you can kind of cut through the weeds to see if they understand or if, your joke is going to fall on deaf ears. It's helpful to understand that you're speaking the same language. And when you're not, that's when you start to take things personal and it stays with you and your resilience becomes, you start to question everything about yourself. So being around people that you can also speak candidly with, you have to have someone to bounce back. I was speaking to someone in the beauty industry who works on the creative side. And I told her, you need to have friends. And, you need to, not necessarily just in the industry, but you need friends in your neighborhood that are outside of your industry who balance out what you think is the end of the world will mean nothing to them. And that brings you back. It brings you back every time. And I'm grateful that, when you're involved in other things like having a church community or for you having a sorority and other things that you volunteer at, those things balance out the work, quote unquote. That's so important.
Oh, that's a beautiful word. So I'm hearing to be more visible in 2019. Also, it means like if you're stepping into new big spaces that you need a way to have some perspective about it too, right? So whether it's the people, whether it's the context that remind you of who you really are, those support structures that, kind of are your own personal reality checks, not externally driven, but in fact, internally driven. I've been reading this book by Peter Bregman called Emotional Courage. And I've been reading it not necessarily for myself, but to see whether it's a possible resource for clients. And the quote that stuck with me in that book is, if you're willing to feel everything, you can do anything. And I've been kind of wrestling with that because kind of considering what it means to step into a more spacious life, a heart's desired life, a visible life, to me means a fuller range of emotional courage. It means being able to see it all, hold it all. And I had and I don't have clear answers for that, but I'm just sort of wrestling with those concepts for myself. And I'm enjoying the fact that even wrestling with that, not having clear answers about what it means for me to be more emotionally courageous. What I've been able to do is see my friends and colleagues and people that I know and love do amazing things. I feel like the universe is just sending me windows to look into, to peer into. So I had the opportunity, and I don't know if she'll listen to this, but I'm shouting her out, not by name, but a friend who this past weekend did something incredibly courageous. She loves to sing, and she's been taking voice lessons, and she's very close to 70 years old. I know. She's been taking voice lessons and held her own concert, solo performer, with an audience of about, 50, 60 people. And it was astounding, like watching the joy on her face as she gave of her heart and soul via song. And I thought, oh my God, how courageous, right? What must it be like to be able to push past, what must have been all the reasons why this is something that I should not do, and to do it. And I am grateful to bear witness to not just that moment, but that moment in others. And I have to believe that in some way, this is a complete circle message for me, like, okay, you too can step into a bigger space in 2019.
Yeah. I love that story about your friend being courageous and just sharing the joy of singing and her love of it. That's fantastic. But sometimes being courageous, and that's a big, bold, courageous move, but all courageous moves don't have to be big. They can be, for someone who has not used their voice, using your voice is courageous. Starting to use your voice and setting boundaries where you were just being a yes woman for so long. Just, clear cut boundaries and being fine with that. That's courageous in and of itself. Saying no, making plans or deciding to do something on your own, not waiting for someone else. Those things are courageous as well. So it's not always, a show-stopping, answer. It's realizing, I think I'm going to do this now. I'm just going to get up and go. Those things can be applauded as well. So it's not always going to be the big thing. It's the small things that add up. And then you realize that you're set on a more courageous path, and you're starting to enjoy it. And maybe it leads to the big thing, the big, show. And it's not always an artistic thing, but it might be for someone being bold and courageous enough to launch their own business. That in and of itself is courageous. So there are a lot of different ways to be courageous and to find joy. And it's important to not wait. I mean, and the fact that I love that she didn't think it was too late either, your friend, that it's not too late now. I mean, if you haven't done anything before, start small, do something. And it can be something only visible and only that you're aware of. It still counts. It still counts. Even if all your friends don't notice, it still counts if you notice.
I love that you talked about the smaller steps, because you are so right that often the yes, when it should have been a no, can set you off, or a series of yeses when they should have all been no's, can set you off on a path that you are like, how did I end up here? And I was thinking about, what are the ways that you can kind of know for sure whether or not you should be kind of embarking on, right, or stopping or setting some boundaries. I shouldn't even just say embarking, but setting boundaries. And for myself, I have tried of late, not always successful, to pay attention to where my energy is. And that could be physical energy, spiritual, emotional, right? Where is my energy right now? I could do a million things. And at the moment, I have energy for one thing, right? I have energy for just one thing. What do I want that one thing to be? Sleep, right? Say no. Speak up on behalf of somebody else. Connect with a friend that I haven't spoken to. Tell somebody I care about them, right? Like what's the kind of decision tree? And often it's default. It's our musts. It's the things that are driven externally. They're not, from our place of our most precious self-care places. So I love that you asked for almost a pause on the big things, right? That might be my heart's desire. And there might be some little things in there that I need to put in check. So
I think sometimes that people are stalled when they don't have the big thing. That's why I said, do the little thing, because the little thing will lead to the big thing. When you don't know what that heart's desire is, because you're so busy doing and not being, then you have no idea what that is. But if you take some time to say the no's, you create the space to explore. And even if you do, one thing in the month of January to advance that, then I think that's the way that you become more visible, that you become a person that you like more. There's a value to liking yourself. We all talk about the self-love and all this stuff, but do you like yourself? You're worrying about what other people think of you, but how you feel about yourself, you project on others.
I was trying to think about the conditions under which this podcast was even birthed. Like if we were to try to replicate the conditions, not necessarily replicate the podcast, but replicate the conditions for something else in 2019, are there things that we would want to share that we learned or anything, kind of that's pertinent to take forward? And I was just thinking, to me, what I noticed about the moments where we started talking, we had space and time to kind of just be together in conversation, in community with one another, in sharing. And I would say that maybe protected time in 2019 to kind of find ways to be, nurtured by those things or those people. I think, what did you call it? You called it a few minutes ago, right? Who can give you some perspective.
Yes.
Right? When I talk to you, I'm not speaking to somebody who will, judge my ideas harshly, right? My crazy ideas or my dreams. I'm not sharing my dreams with just anybody when I'm talking to you about them. So I think, my dining room table where this was birthed allowed us just kind of space to talk about what was important to us.
We had built up over a number of years this history of just coming together at least once a year and just talking about where we wanted to go. Like, as one of my friends says, what we would dream a world and then try to figure out like how. And this podcast came because we were dreaming a world where the work we could do, we each do intersect. But having the opportunity and the space to just dream with someone, not goal plan and vision board, and that's all good. But that requires, but you first have to dream, and you have to dream unfettered. You have to dream big, and then see where that takes you. And finding those people who allow you that space to do it without judgment is critical. And from there, it is when you want to work with other people, it's great if you all have the same skill set, but it's even better if you don't. And I think that one of the things that works for us, that we have different backgrounds and different strengths. So we give each other the space to be. And that makes it more interesting because it's a constant learning experience. So to become more visible, you have to be able to not only speak and use your voice, but use your ears and learn. Use your ears and your brain, because you don't know what you don't know. And when you commit to being around people who will challenge you to know more, you can't help but be more visible and see things. Things become more visible to you because you know more. So I want to ask you this. For our listeners, what one thing would you challenge them to do right now?
My constant challenge for anybody that I work with is the challenge to listen to yourself, is to be able to be still enough to find your own answers. And especially for people who have very, very busy lives, I often look to see if that busyness is so that they don't have to find time to be with themselves. So, and look, I'm talking about myself in that way too. That's part of why I think I can see it. So 2019, my challenge to you and to myself is to find more ways to be still, to be with yourself and find your own answers. They're in there to be found.
And I think I'd add to that, when you're with yourself and you're taking inventory, because that's what we do when we start to think about who we are, that you give yourself some grace. Give yourself a break. None of us are perfect. So find that one thing you didn't know you liked about yourself, or that one skill you forgot you had, and embrace that. It's as simple as that. Embrace one thing. And it would be something that you've forgotten about that gives you joy. Because I think being visible and standing in this space, a lot of times we're fighting to be seen, and this show, we're telling you to just be. And when you just be, if you just be and you're solid within yourself, you're visible in a different way.
I would say that one of the powerful things about having a partner in this podcast is that person, and my partner in Corynne, she reminds me all the time of who I really am. And I hope I do that for her as well.
Absolutely.
So we hope that this is going to be, so we hope that our discussion about how we intend to be visible in 2019 can be a starting place for you as well. Whether you are taking on something big, some heart's desire activity, whether or not you are taking a step to set some boundaries, or a small step to advance what you want, or whether or not you're just holding up the mirror to yourself and being and doing some self-care, giving yourself grace. All of it's a start. Absolutely everything is progress. So here's to being visible in 2019